What if the empire that has for centuries been cast as the villain in the grand narrative of the West, the shadowy monolith against which the light of freedom was supposedly kindled, is a phantom? What if the popular image of a decadent, tyrannical power, a caricature crafted by its enemies, obscures a reality far more revolutionary, far more influential, and far more magnificent than we have been led to believe? What if we were to embark on an investigation, to peel back the layers of hostile propaganda and cinematic distortion, to find the true story of one of the most powerful and misunderstood superpowers in human history? If that journey excites you, if uncovering lost truths and challenging dominant narratives is your kind of exploration, then like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's a small act that helps these long-form stories reach more curious minds like yours. This is not just a story of kings and battles, but of an idea, a radical vision of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious world state, held together not by terror, but by tolerance, infrastructure, and a revolutionary concept of universal law. To find this empire is to uncover a lost blueprint for global governance, to trace the origins of concepts we now take for granted. From standardized currency to postal systems, from federal administration to the very notion of human rights. We must silence the drums of ancient wars and listen for a different sound, the hum of 1,000 languages spoken in a single capital, the rustle of decrees guaranteeing freedom of worship, the thunder of chariots on a royal road that stitched a continent together. This is the story of the empire that invented the world and then was deliberately forgotten. It is the pursuit of a legacy that was not so much destroyed as it was absorbed into the DNA of its conquerors and its rivals. A legacy that continues to shape our world in ways we have yet to fully comprehend. This is the story of the real Persian Empire, and its heart was not one of darkness, but of a light so brilliant it illuminated the path for all the empires that would follow. The world into which the Persian idea was born was a fractured landscape of titans, a world defined by the ashes of one fallen superpower and the simmering ambitions of its heirs. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, that great engine of terror and control, had been shattered, its capital of Nineveh erased from the earth by a coalition of its vengeful subjects. But the ghost of its power lingered, a testament to the brutal logic that had governed the Near East for 3 centuries: conquer or be conquered, dominate or be destroyed. Out of the wreckage, 3 major powers had emerged to divide the spoils, creating a precarious new balance. In the south, in the ancient heartland of Mesopotamia, the Neo-Babylonian Empire rose to a brief but brilliant golden age. Under kings like Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon became the largest and most magnificent city on earth, a fortress of immense walls and hanging gardens, the center of a rich and powerful state that controlled the Fertile Crescent. To the west, in the Anatolian Peninsula, lay the Kingdom of Lydia, a land of legendary wealth, whose king, Croesus, was so rich his name became a synonym for immense fortune. The Lydians were pioneers, the first to mint standardized coins of pure gold and silver, a technological leap that supercharged their commercial power. And to the east, occupying the vast Iranian plateau, stood the Median Empire, the kingdom of the mountain horsemen who had been the primary architects of Assyria's downfall. They were the senior partners in the New World Order, a formidable military power that controlled a vast, mountainous domain. This tripartite world was a delicate equilibrium of giants. Alliances were sealed with royal marriages, borders were drawn along rivers, and diplomacy was a constant, wary dance. Yet, beneath this surface of stability, the old anxieties remained. Each kingdom was a cage of nations, a collection of different peoples and religions held together by the authority of a ruling elite. Each king eyed the others with suspicion, knowing that this fragile peace could be shattered by a single act of ambition. This was a world of immense wealth, sophisticated culture, and deep-seated paranoia. It was a world waiting for a new idea, a force that could transcend the endless cycle of rising and falling empires, a vision that could offer something more than mere subjugation. On the periphery of this grand stage, in the semi-arid lands of Persis, a vassal state of the Median Empire, that new idea was beginning to stir, embodied in a young prince whose destiny would be to swallow this world of titans whole and build a new one in its place. History is often conceived in legend, and the birth of the man who would forge the Persian Empire is shrouded in the mists of a foundational myth that speaks to a destiny too great to be left to chance. In the land of Anshan, a province of the Median Empire, a child was born to the Persian nobility, a people who were vassals to their Median cousins. The child's name was Cyrus. His maternal grandfather was the mighty Median king, Astyages, who ruled from his grand capital at Ecbatana. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, who chronicles the Persian rise, Astyages had a terrifying dream. A vine grew from the womb of his daughter, Mandane, and this vine grew to overshadow all of Asia. His court priests, the Magi, interpreted this as a clear omen that his grandson, the child Mandane carried, would one day usurp his throne and rule in his stead. Terrified by the prophecy, Astyages became a figure of Shakespearean paranoia. He could not allow this child to live. When Cyrus was born, the king summoned his most trusted courtier, a man named Harpagus, and gave him a terrible command: take the infant into the mountains and leave him to die. But Harpagus, unable to bring himself to commit such a monstrous act, gave the baby instead to a humble herdsman, swearing him to secrecy. And so, the heir to a prophesied empire was raised in obscurity, dressed in the rough-spun clothes of a commoner, learning the ways of the mountains and the fields, entirely unaware of the royal blood that flowed in his veins. The myth serves a profound purpose. It casts Cyrus not as a rebel or a usurper, but as a figure of destiny, a man whom fate itself had chosen. It portrays him as a natural king whose innate nobility could not be suppressed by his humble surroundings. The legend continues that, as a boy in a game with other village children, Cyrus was chosen to be their king, and he played the part with such an air of authority, even punishing the son of a nobleman for disobedience. That word of his strange charisma reached the royal court. When the boy was brought before Astyages, the king was struck by his regal bearing and a nagging family resemblance. The truth was eventually revealed, and while the king was furious, he believed the prophecy had been fulfilled in a trivial way. Cyrus had been a king in a children's game, and so he spared the boy's life, sending him to his true parents in Persia. This act of mercy, born of arrogance, would be his undoing. The myth of Cyrus is the story of a force of nature that cannot be contained, a leader whose legitimacy comes not from inheritance alone, but from an inherent greatness, a man forged in the crucible of adversity and chosen by the gods to reshape the world. The return of Cyrus to Persia was the return of a catalyst to a reactive element. He was no longer just a man, but the living embodiment of Persian ambition. His people, the Persians, were a proud and martial society, closely related in language and culture to their Median overlords, but they chafed under their status as vassals. They were the junior partners in the Iranian world, and they yearned for a leader who could elevate them to their rightful place. Cyrus was that leader. Charismatic, brilliant, and driven by a sense of destiny, he quickly unified the disparate Persian tribes under his banner, creating a single, formidable force. He saw the rot at the heart of the Median Empire, the decadence and cruelty of his grandfather Astyages' court, and the growing discontent among the powerful Median nobility who had once been the bedrock of the state. He knew the time was right to make his move, not merely for Persian independence, but for the throne of the empire itself. The ensuing conflict was not a war between foreign nations. It was a civil war, a dynastic struggle within the ruling family of the Iranian peoples. It was a transfer of power from an older, complacent branch of the family to a younger, more vigorous one. When Cyrus finally raised the standard of rebellion, Astyages, belatedly realizing the mortal threat his grandson posed, mustered the vast Median army and marched to crush him. But the seeds of his own downfall had been sown years before. The commander he chose for his army was Harpagus, the same courtier he had commanded to kill the infant Cyrus, and whose own son the king had brutally murdered in an act of petty vengeance. Harpagus, who had been secretly plotting his revenge for years, saw his moment. On the battlefield, at the critical juncture, he betrayed his king. A huge contingent of the Median army, disillusioned with Astyages and inspired by the dynamic young Persian prince, defected to Cyrus's side. The battle turned into a rout. Astyages was captured, his reign over. Cyrus, in an act of brilliant political theater and perhaps genuine magnanimity, spared his grandfather's life. He presented himself not as a conqueror, but as the legitimate successor, the grandson who was merely claiming his inheritance. He marched into the Median capital of Ecbatana, not as a destroyer, but as a unifier. He did not purge the Median elite, he absorbed them. He appointed Median nobles to the highest positions in his army and his administration, making them partners in his new enterprise. This was the masterstroke. The Persian state became a fusion of Persian and Median strength, a seamless continuation of the empire that had come before, but now imbued with a new energy, a new vision, and a new, unstoppable ambition. The torch had been passed, and the Persian lion, now fused with its Median counterpart, was ready to hunt on a global scale. With the combined strength of the Medes and Persians consolidated under his command, Cyrus cast his gaze westward, towards the glittering prize of Anatolia and the kingdom of Lydia. This was to be the first great test of his new empire against one of the established titans of the age. The Lydian king, Croesus, was a figure of legendary wealth and power, the ruler of a sophisticated commercial empire built on the world's first true currency. He watched the sudden, explosive rise of the upstart Persians with growing alarm. The swift collapse of the Median Empire, his former ally, had shattered the old balance of power and left Lydia exposed. Croesus was not a man to wait for the storm to break upon him. He decided to strike first, to check this new power before it could grow any stronger. Before launching his campaign, he sought guidance from the most famous oracle in the ancient world, the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. He sent lavish gifts and asked the fateful question, should he wage war on Persia? The oracle gave a famously ambiguous reply, if you cross the river, you will destroy a great empire. Croesus, blinded by his own confidence, interpreted this as a clear promise of victory. He believed the great empire to be destroyed was that of Cyrus. He led his army across the Halys River, the traditional border between their realms, and initiated the war. The initial clash was a bloody stalemate, and as winter approached, Croesus, following the military conventions of the time, disbanded part of his army and retreated to his capital, Sardis, expecting Cyrus to do the same. But Cyrus was not a conventional leader. He was a master of the unexpected, a predator who thrived on speed and surprise. Seeing his opponent's error, he pushed his army forward through the harsh winter weather, marching directly on Sardis itself. Croesus, caught completely off guard, hastily assembled his remaining forces for a desperate battle on the plain before his city. The pride of the Lydian army was its powerful cavalry. Cyrus, knowing his own horsemen were outnumbered and likely outmatched, devised a brilliant and unorthodox stratagem. He took the hundreds of baggage camels that followed his army and placed them at the front of his line. The Lydian war horses, unfamiliar with the strange smell and sight of the camels, panicked. They reared and bolted, throwing the Lydian cavalry into chaos and rendering their greatest weapon useless. The ensuing battle was a decisive Persian victory. Croesus was driven back behind the walls of Sardis, a city famed for its impregnable citadel. But even here, Persian ingenuity triumphed. A Persian soldier, observing a Lydian defender retrieve a dropped helmet from a hidden path up a cliff face, discovered a secret vulnerability. A small party of Persian soldiers scaled the cliff and entered the citadel, opening the gates from within. The city fell, and Croesus was captured. He had indeed crossed the river and destroyed a great empire, but it was his own. The fall of Lydia sent a shockwave across the world. One of the three great powers had been snuffed out with breathtaking speed. The Persian Empire now stretched from the heart of Iran to the shores of the Aegean Sea, and its ruler was beginning to look less like a king and more like a force of nature. The conquest of Lydia had made Cyrus the master of Anatolia, but the grandest prize of all still lay to the south, the ancient, magnificent, and seemingly unconquerable city of Babylon. Babylon was more than just the capital of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. It was the heart of Mesopotamian civilization, a city whose history stretched back into the dawn of time. Under its current king, Nabonidus, it was a fortress of colossal scale. Its outer walls were said to be so thick that two chariots could race abreast upon their summit. The mighty Euphrates River flowed through the very heart of the city, not only providing water but also forming a natural moat integrated into a complex system of defenses that made a direct assault seem impossible. For years, Nabonidus had been an absentee king, dedicating himself to the worship of the moon god Sin and leaving the administration of the city to his son, Belshazzar. This had alienated the powerful and conservative priesthood of Babylon's chief god, Marduk, creating a deep internal rift within the city's elite. Cyrus, a master of both military strategy and psychological warfare, saw this weakness and exploited it brilliantly. He launched a sophisticated propaganda campaign, presenting himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a liberator, the chosen instrument of Marduk himself, coming to restore the proper order and free the people from a neglectful and impious king. His agents spread this message throughout Babylonia, winning the hearts and minds of many before his army had even arrived. When the Persian army finally advanced in 539 BCE, the decisive battle was fought at Opis on the Tigris River. The Babylonian army was crushed and the road to the capital lay open. But the city of Babylon itself still stood, a daunting final obstacle. It was here that Cyrus executed his most audacious and legendary plan. He knew a frontal siege would be costly and long. Instead, he waited for a great Babylonian festival, a night when he knew the city's guard would be lax. Upstream from the city, he had his engineers divert the flow of the Euphrates River into a prepared canal and marshland. As the water level in the riverbed dropped, becoming a shallow, muddy stream, it created an undefended highway into the heart of the city. The Persian army, under the command of one of his generals, simply waded through the riverbed under the massive water gates and entered the city without a fight. The citizens of Babylon, many of whom had already been won over by his propaganda, offered little resistance. The great city fell in a single night of stealth and brilliant engineering. The Babylonian Empire, the second of the world's three great powers, had ceased to exist. Cyrus entered the city not as a destroyer, but as a savior, forbidding looting and proclaiming peace. This was not a conquest in the Assyrian mold. It was the dawn of a new kind of empire. The fall of Babylon was not just a military victory. It was the moment Cyrus's revolutionary vision for a new world order was put into practice. His actions in the aftermath of the conquest were unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. The standard practice for millennia, perfected by the Assyrians, was to conquer, to plunder, to deport, and to impose one's own gods upon the vanquished. It was a cycle of violent subjugation that bred resentment and ensured future rebellions. Cyrus shattered this paradigm. Instead of sacking the city, he treated it with profound respect. He paid homage to its traditions and, most importantly, to its gods. He publicly worshipped at the shrine of Marduk, the city's chief deity, positioning himself as the legitimate successor chosen by the local god, not as a foreign overlord. This act of political genius immediately pacified the powerful priesthood and the general populace. But he went even further. In a move that would echo through history, he issued a decree now immortalized on a clay artifact known as the Cyrus Cylinder. This declaration was, in essence, the world's first charter of human rights. On it, Cyrus declared that the inhabitants of Babylon and all the other cities in his new empire were free to continue their lives unmolested. He guaranteed the security of their property and, most radically, their freedom of religion. He decreed that all the various peoples whom the Babylonian kings had forcibly deported and brought to Mesopotamia were free to return to their homelands. This included the Jewish people who had been in exile in Babylon for decades. Cyrus not only allowed them to return to Judah, but also provided funds for the rebuilding of their temple in Jerusalem. This was an unprecedented act of state-sponsored religious tolerance. He was creating a new model of empire, a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-religious superpower. Its unity would not be based on the forced imposition of a single culture or faith, but on a foundation of mutual respect, security, and centralized administration. The empire was to be a vast commonwealth of nations, each retaining its local identity and customs, all under the protection of a Persian king who styled himself not as a conqueror, but as a shepherd of peoples. This was the Pax Persica, the Persian peace. It was an idea as powerful as any army, a promise of stability and freedom that was profoundly attractive to the diverse and often warring peoples of the Near East. Cyrus was not just building a bigger kingdom, he was building a different kind of kingdom, an empire of ideas. He was attempting to govern the world, not by breaking its spirit, but by winning its loyalty. Having conquered the three great powers of his day and established the largest empire the world had ever known, Cyrus the Great was not a man to rest on his laurels. The founder of a new world order knew that an empire was not a static creation, but a living entity that must be constantly defended and its borders secured. The vast wealth and stability of the empire's heartland were always threatened by the turbulent, nomadic peoples who inhabited the vast steppes of Central Asia to the northeast. These were fierce, nomadic warrior cultures, a constant source of raids and instability on the imperial frontier. To secure his creation and pacify this volatile region, Cyrus embarked on his final campaign. He marched his army northeast towards the Jaxartes River, into the territory of the Massagetae, a powerful confederation of steppe nomads led by a formidable warrior queen named Tomyris. The accounts of this final campaign, again from the Greek historian Herodotus, are steeped in drama and tragedy. Cyrus, it is said, first attempted to subdue the Massagetae through diplomacy, proposing a marriage to Queen Tomyris. She, seeing it as a bid to take her kingdom, refused. War became inevitable. Cyrus, employing a cunning but cruel stratagem, left a camp behind filled with wine and fine foods. A contingent of the Massagetae army, led by Tomyris' own son, fell upon the camp, indulged in the unfamiliar drink, and were easily captured or killed in their drunken state. Tomyris' son, overcome with shame upon sobering up, took his own life. Enraged and grief-stricken, the queen sent a message to Cyrus, swearing to give him his fill of blood. She gathered her full forces and met the Persian army in a massive, ferocious battle. According to Herodotus, it was one of the most savage battles ever fought between non-Greek peoples. The Persian army, fighting far from its heartland in an unfamiliar terrain against a desperate and vengeful enemy, was ultimately defeated. Cyrus the Great, the conqueror of Media, Lydia, and Babylonia, the unifier of the known world, was killed in battle. The legend concludes with a gruesome final act of vengeance. Queen Tomyris, finding the body of the Persian king on the battlefield, had his head severed and plunged into a wineskin filled with human blood, crying out, "I give you your fill of blood, just as I threatened." Whether this dramatic end is historical fact or a cautionary tale about hubris is unknown. But it solidifies the mythic status of Cyrus. He died not in a palace, but on the battlefield, pushing the boundaries of his empire, a warrior king to the very end. His death marked the end of the foundational era, leaving behind a colossal, world-changing empire, but also a profound question. Could this creation, the product of one man's singular genius, survive without its architect? The death of the founder is the first great test of any empire. The vast state Cyrus had built was now passed to his son, Cambyses II, a man who inherited not just the throne, but the immense, almost impossible burden of his father's legacy. Cambyses was a capable military commander, but he seemed to lack his father's visionary statesmanship and gift for diplomacy. His reign was defined by one major objective: the conquest of the last great independent kingdom of the ancient Near East, the ancient and fabulously wealthy civilization of Egypt. Egypt was the only remaining rival to Persian power, a land protected by formidable deserts and the life-giving Nile. In 525 BCE, Cambyses launched a massive invasion. The campaign was meticulously planned. He secured the alliance of Arabian chiefs to provide water for his army's arduous crossing of the Sinai Desert and built a powerful navy with the help of his Phoenician and Cypriot subjects to challenge Egyptian sea power. The decisive battle took place at Pelusium in the Nile Delta. Here again, Persian cunning proved decisive. According to a later Greek writer, Polyaenus, Cambyses, knowing that the Egyptians held certain animals to be sacred, particularly cats, placed these animals at the front of his army. The Egyptian soldiers, unwilling to risk harming the sacred creatures, hesitated to fire their arrows, and their line was broken. The Persians won a crushing victory. Cambyses marched on to the capital of Memphis, captured the pharaoh, and Egypt, a civilization that had endured for nearly 3 millennia, became a satrapy of the Persian Empire. With this conquest, the Achaemenid Empire reached its maximum territorial extent, a colossal superstate that stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to Libya in the west, from the Caucasus Mountains in the north to the deserts of Nubia in the south. It was, without question, the largest, wealthiest, and most powerful state on earth. However, the historical accounts of Cambyses' time in Egypt, primarily from Greek sources, paint a dark picture. He is accused of wanton cruelty, of mocking Egyptian religious customs, of wounding the sacred Apis bull, and of descending into a spiral of paranoia and madness. He is said to have executed his own brother, Smerdis or Bardia, out of jealousy. This portrayal may be hostile propaganda, a narrative shaped by his enemies to delegitimize his rule. It is equally possible that the immense pressures of ruling such a vast and complex entity, coupled with the long absence from the imperial heartland, took a heavy toll on the king. Whatever the truth, Cambyses' reign ended in turmoil. While returning from Egypt, he received shocking news. A usurper had seized the throne back in Persia, a man claiming to be his supposedly dead brother, Smerdis. As Cambyses rushed back to confront this threat, he died under mysterious circumstances, perhaps from an infected leg wound, perhaps by his own hand. He left behind an empire larger than ever, but now teetering on the brink of civil war, its stability threatened by a phantom king. The death of Cambyses plunged the Persian Empire into its most severe crisis since its inception. The news that had reached him before his death was that of a palace coup of the most bizarre and unnerving kind. A man had appeared in the heart of the empire claiming to be Bardia, the brother whom Cambyses had secretly executed years earlier. In the Greek sources, this figure is named Smerdis, and he is described not as the true prince, but as a Magian priest named Gomata, who bore a striking resemblance to the dead royal. This phantom king, whether the real Bardia who had somehow survived or a brilliant impostor, understood the political landscape perfectly. He initiated a populist revolution, granting a 3-year remission of taxes and military service to all the peoples of the empire. This made him immensely popular with the common people and the subject nations, who felt alienated by Cambyses' long absence and rumored tyranny. For 7 months, this figure ruled the Achaemenid Empire. The established Persian nobility, the very families who had helped Cyrus the Great forge the state, were thrown into confusion and suspicion. Was this the true son of Cyrus, their rightful lord? Or was he an impostor who had stolen the throne and was undermining the very foundations of Persian authority? The empire, which was a delicate tapestry of many different nations, was in danger of unraveling. Loyalty was divided. The central authority that had been the bedrock of the state was now shrouded in doubt. It was a moment of extreme peril. The vast machinery of the empire was grinding to a halt, its future uncertain. Into this chaotic vacuum stepped a young man from a collateral branch of the Achaemenid royal family. His name was Darius. He was a prince who had served as a spear-bearer in Cambyses' elite guard, a man of immense ambition, intelligence, and ruthless determination. Darius saw the mortal danger the empire was in, but he also saw an opportunity. He was convinced that the man on the throne was the impostor Gaumata. He gathered a small group of 6 other powerful Persian nobles, forming a conspiracy of 7. They secretly made their way to the fortress where the Phantom King was residing. In a daring raid, they stormed the stronghold, found the usurper, and killed him. The throne was now vacant, the empire leaderless and fractured. The 7 conspirators then had to decide what came next. According to the legend recounted by Herodotus, they agreed to ride their horses out at dawn, and whoever's horse neighed first at the rising sun would be acclaimed the new king. Darius, through a clever trick of his groom, ensured his horse was the first to cry out. A flash of lightning and a clap of thunder from a clear sky were taken as divine confirmation. Darius, the restorer of order, was proclaimed the new great king of the Persian Empire. Darius I, often called Darius the Great, ascended to a throne that was anything but stable. The murder of the usurper Gaumata did not end the chaos, it unleashed it. The death of the popular Phantom King triggered a wave of rebellions across the vast empire. The subject nations, who had enjoyed the tax breaks and freedom from military service, saw the coup by the Persian nobility as a reassertion of oppressive central control. From Babylonia to Media, from Elam to the far-flung eastern provinces, the empire exploded in revolt. It seemed as though the grand creation of Cyrus was about to shatter into a dozen pieces. Darius's first year as king was not spent on a throne, but on the battlefield. He was faced with the monumental task of reconquering his own empire. In a series of lightning campaigns, he marched his army back and forth across his vast domain, confronting and defeating 9 different pretenders who had risen up to claim kingship in their respective lands. It was a testament to his incredible energy, military genius, and unshakable will. He was not just a king, he was a force of nature, personally leading his armies and systematically extinguishing the fires of rebellion one by one. But Darius understood that military victory alone was not enough. The empire could not be held together by constant warfare. The crisis had revealed deep structural weaknesses in its administration. He realized that to prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again, he needed to completely reorganize the state. He was the great organizer, the man who would provide the administrative software for Cyrus's hardware. He divided the empire into approximately 20 provinces, or satrapies. Each satrapy was governed by a political governor, the satrap, who was responsible for administration and justice. Crucially, the military commander and the chief financial officer of each province were separate appointments, reporting directly back to the king. This brilliant system of checks and balances was designed to prevent any single provincial governor from accumulating too much power and challenging the central authority. To bind this vast realm together, Darius commissioned the construction of the Royal Road, a magnificent highway stretching over 1,600 miles from his administrative capital at Susa to the western city of Sardis. With a series of posting stations and fresh horses, royal couriers could traverse the length of the empire in as little as 7 days, a speed unheard of in the ancient world. It was the central nervous system of his empire. He also introduced a standardized imperial currency, the gold Daric and silver siglos, which facilitated trade and taxation across his diverse realms. And he codified the laws, creating a universal system of justice that respected local customs but was ultimately subject to the king's law. Darius was not just restoring the empire, he was perfecting it, transforming it from a collection of conquered lands into a coherent, functioning, and durable world state. To commemorate his hard-won victory over the rebels and to legitimize his own rule, which did not come from direct succession but from conquest. Darius commissioned one of the most remarkable monuments in history, the Behistun inscription. On the face of a high limestone cliff, along a major trade route connecting Mesopotamia to the Iranian plateau, he commanded his artisans to carve a massive bas-relief and a vast accompanying text. This was to be his autobiography, his political manifesto, and the empire's official birth certificate, written in stone for all time. The relief itself is a powerful piece of propaganda. It depicts Darius as a triumphant king, his foot planted firmly on the chest of the defeated usurper, Gaumata. Behind Gaumata stands a line of 9 captive rebel kings, their necks bound by a single rope, their hands tied behind their backs, a vivid illustration of the chaos he had vanquished. Above them all hovers the symbol of the Zoroastrian creator god, Ahura Mazda, bestowing divine sanction upon Darius's rule. The message was clear and unmistakable. Darius ruled by the grace of God and had brought order out of chaos, truth out of lies. But the true marvel of the Behistun inscription is its text. The same story of the rebellions and his triumph is meticulously recounted in 3 different languages, the 3 major scripts of his empire: Old Persian, the language of the ruling elite; Elamite, the language of the administrative heartland; and Babylonian, the language of the empire's most ancient and prestigious cultural center. The inscription begins with a bold declaration of his identity and his right to rule. "I am Darius, the great king, king of kings, king in Persia, king of countries." He then details, province by province, the lies of the rebel kings and the divinely aided victories that restored the good state of the empire. This trilingual text would later become the key that unlocked the secrets of the ancient Near East. Just as the Rosetta Stone allowed scholars to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Behistun inscription, particularly its Old Persian text, provided the key for deciphering the cuneiform scripts of Mesopotamia, opening up thousands of years of human history that had been lost to time. The inscription was a monumental act of communication, a broadcast to the diverse peoples of his realm. It was the empire finally speaking in its own powerful voice. It established the core ideology of Achaemenid kingship. The king was the chosen agent of the divine order, tasked with upholding truth, right, and defeating the lie. Drauga. He was not merely a conqueror. He was a moral agent, the guarantor of cosmic stability. The monument at Behistun was the ultimate justification of his power, a declaration that his reign was not an accident of history, but a sacred duty. With his empire reorganized, pacified, and ideologically fortified, Darius the Great turned his attention to its frontiers. His gaze fell upon the vast, untamed lands of the north, across the Danube River, the wild domain of the Scythians. The Scythians were a nomadic people, masters of mounted archery, who roamed the vast Eurasian steppe. They were a constant threat to the settled agricultural lands to their south, a source of instability on the empire's European and Central Asian borders. Darius decided to launch a massive punitive expedition, an undertaking of immense scale and ambition. His goals were likely twofold: to punish the Scythians for past raids, and to secure the northern frontier of his empire once and for all, perhaps even to control the lucrative trade routes for grain and gold that came from the Black Sea region. Around 5113 BCE, he assembled a colossal army and a fleet of ships provided by his Greek subjects in Ionia. He crossed the Bosphorus on a massive bridge of boats, a marvel of engineering, and marched into Europe. He then crossed the mighty Danube River, venturing deep into what is now Ukraine and southern Russia, into the endless, featureless grasslands of the steppe. But here, the conventional power of the Persian war machine met its match not in a rival army, but in a rival strategy. The Scythians refused to engage in a pitched battle. They were a phantom enemy. They employed scorched earth tactics, burning the grasslands, poisoning the wells, and constantly retreating before the advancing Persian columns. They harassed the Persian supply lines with lightning raids, their horse archers striking from a distance and then melting back into the vast landscape. The Persian army, with its heavy infantry and long supply train, was drawn deeper and deeper into a hostile void. The campaign turned into a frustrating and costly exercise in futility. The Persians could conquer no cities, for the Scythians had none. They could defeat no army, for the Scythian army would not stand and fight. Darius realized he was fighting a ghost, a war against geography itself. His army was being worn down by attrition, hunger, and the vast emptiness of the steppe. Acknowledging that the campaign could not be won, Darius made the pragmatic decision to withdraw. He managed to extricate his army from the Scythian trap and lead them back across the Danube, having suffered losses but avoiding a complete catastrophe. While the expedition failed in its primary goal of subjugating the Scythians, it was not a total failure from the Persian perspective. Darius had successfully demonstrated the reach of his power, marching a European army farther east than any had before. He secured Thrace as a new satrapy, firmly planting the Persian flag on the European continent and gaining control of the valuable resources of the region. However, the Scythian campaign was also a valuable, if harsh, lesson. It revealed the limits of imperial power. It showed that even the mightiest empire on earth could be humbled by an unconventional enemy and a hostile environment. It was a subtle but important foreshadowing of the challenges the empire would face when it next turned its attention to Europe, to the small, fractious, and fiercely independent city-states of a land called Greece. The first great challenge to the stability of Darius's perfected empire came not from the wild frontiers, but from its most sophisticated and restive subjects, the Ionian Greeks. The Greek city-states along the western coast of Anatolia, a region known as Ionia, had been incorporated into the empire since the time of Cyrus. They were a people with a fierce tradition of independence and political experimentation, concepts that were often at odds with the centralized, hierarchical structure of the Persian state. While they benefited from the Persian peace, enjoying security and prosperous trade, they resented the loss of their autonomy and the rule of pro-Persian tyrants installed by the satraps. The spark that ignited the flame of rebellion came in 499 BCE from the ambitious tyrant of Miletus. He instigated a revolt that spread like wildfire up and down the Ionian coast. This was more than just a local uprising, it became a clash of worldviews. The Ionians, in a fateful move, appealed to their brethren on the Greek mainland for aid. The city of Athens, a rising power with a new and radical form of government called democracy, responded, sending a contingent of 20 ships. The combined rebel force marched inland and attacked the provincial capital of Sardis. They managed to capture the lower city and, in the ensuing chaos, a fire broke out that consumed the city, including the great temple of the local goddess Cybele. To the Persians, this act was an unforgivable sacrilege, a direct attack on the king's peace and the divine order he was sworn to protect. The burning of Sardis was the point of no return. Darius was enraged. The story goes that he had a servant repeat to him 3 times every day at dinner, "Master, remember the Athenians," so that he would never forget their transgression. The Persian response was massive and systematic. Over several years, their armies and navy methodically crushed the rebellion city by city. The final decisive battle was a naval engagement off the island of Lade in 494 BCE, where the Ionian fleet was annihilated. The city of Miletus, the heart of the revolt, was captured and destroyed, its people killed or enslaved, a brutal message to any other subjects who might contemplate rebellion. The Ionian revolt was over, Persian authority was restored, but the conflict had fundamentally changed the relationship between the Persian Empire and the Greek world. For Darius, the job was not finished. The mainland Greek cities, particularly Athens, had aided the rebels. They had interfered in the king's domains and had participated in the burning of his city. This was an insult that could not be left unanswered. The honor of the king and the security of the empire demanded retribution. The Ionian spark had lit a fire that would not be easily extinguished. It would now leap across the Aegean Sea, setting the stage for a direct confrontation between the Colossus of the East and the burgeoning city-states of the West, a conflict that would be immortalized as one of the defining struggles in history. The suppression of the Ionian revolt was merely the prelude. For Darius the Great, the intervention of Athens was a flagrant challenge to his authority, a disruption of the world order he had so meticulously constructed. A punitive expedition was necessary, not just for revenge, but to secure the western frontier of his empire and demonstrate the long reach of the king's power. In 490 BCE, he dispatched a powerful amphibious force across the Aegean Sea. This was not a full-scale invasion intended for permanent conquest, but a targeted strike force with specific objectives: to punish the cities of Athens and Eretria for their role in the revolt, and to reassert Persian control over the Aegean islands. The Persian fleet, a testament to the empire's logistical prowess, first fell upon the city of Eretria, which was besieged, captured, and its population enslaved, its temples burned in direct retribution for the destruction at Sardis. The Persian force then sailed on to their primary target, Athens. Guided by a Greek traitor, they landed on the coast of Attica at a wide, crescent-shaped bay called Marathon. From the Persian perspective, the situation was ideal. The flat plain was perfect for their cavalry, their primary shock weapon. They vastly outnumbered the Athenian force that had gathered to oppose them. To the Persian commanders, the outcome seemed a foregone conclusion. This was supposed to be the final, decisive act of a routine police action against a troublesome city on the fringe of their world. But the Athenians, fighting for their homes, their freedom, and their very existence, were not a typical foe. In a bold and desperate gamble, the Athenian commanders decided to attack, to charge the superior Persian force before its dreaded cavalry could be fully deployed. The Greek hoplites, heavily armored foot soldiers, ran across the plain, a terrifying and unexpected sight. They strengthened their flanks and deliberately weakened their center. The Persian forces, confident in their numbers, pushed through the weak Athenian center, only to be enveloped and attacked from both sides by the stronger Greek wings. The Persian lines, unused to this kind of brutal, close-quarters infantry fighting, broke and fled in panic towards their ships. The result was a stunning and completely unexpected victory for Athens. For the Persians, the Battle of Marathon was a humiliating setback. It was not a catastrophic military defeat on the scale of their major wars, but a sharp, stinging blow to their prestige and their aura of invincibility. A small, provincial city had defied the will of the great king and had gotten away with it. The expeditionary force sailed home, having failed in its main objective. For Darius, this was an unacceptable stain on his honor. The Athenian problem was no longer a minor irritation, it was a major strategic imperative. He began to plan a second, much larger invasion, a massive campaign that would not just punish Athens, but would subjugate all of Greece once and for all, incorporating it fully into the empire. The wheels of the imperial war machine began to turn on a scale never before seen, but time was not on the great king's side. Despite the setback at Marathon, the Persian Empire under Darius remained the undisputed superpower of its age, a vast, stable, and immensely prosperous world state. The last years of Darius's reign were dedicated to consolidating his administrative reforms and initiating monumental construction projects that would be the enduring symbols of Achaemenid power and glory. He was not just a warrior and an administrator, he was a master builder. He founded a new dynastic capital, a city that would be known to the Greeks as Persepolis, the city of the Persians. Nestled in the heart of the Persian homeland, this was not intended to be an administrative or commercial center like Susa or Babylon. Persepolis was a ceremonial and spiritual capital, a sacred stage for the rituals of kingship. On a vast, raised stone terrace, Darius and his successors would build a breathtaking complex of palaces, audience halls, and treasuries, adorned with intricate reliefs depicting the diverse peoples of the empire bringing tribute to the great king. It was a vision of the empire in miniature, a microcosm of a world united in peaceful submission to a benevolent ruler. The art and architecture of Persepolis were a unique synthesis of the many cultures the Persians ruled, blending Median, Babylonian, Egyptian, and Greek styles into a new, distinctly Persian imperial aesthetic. This was a physical manifestation of the Achaemenid vision, a universal empire that did not erase local cultures, but absorbed and harmonized them. In these final years, Darius also continued his preparations for the second invasion of Greece. The defeat at Marathon had been a lesson, and he was not a man to make the same mistake twice. The next campaign would be overwhelming, a deployment of the empire's full military might, led by the King of Kings himself. But fate intervened. A major revolt broke out in Egypt, a province far more vital to the empire's economy and prestige than Greece. As Darius prepared to march to suppress the Egyptian rebellion, his health began to fail. In 486 BCE, after a reign of 36 years, Darius the Great, the restorer, organizer, and perfecter of the Persian Empire, died. He left behind a legacy of unparalleled achievement. He had inherited an empire on the brink of collapse and had reforged it into a stronger, more coherent, and more durable entity than ever before. He had given it a legal system, a road network, a common currency, and a powerful ideological foundation. He had created a machine of empire that was designed to run for centuries. The throne now passed to his son, Xerxes I. Xerxes inherited the wealthiest and most powerful state on earth, an empire at the absolute zenith of its glory. But he also inherited his father's unfinished business, the unpunished defiance of Athens, and the grand, fully prepared plan for the subjugation of Greece. The stage was set for the greatest invasion the ancient world had ever seen, a clash that would pit the full, spectacular might of the Persian Empire against a handful of cities fighting for their survival. Xerxes I, son of Darius the Great and grandson of Cyrus the Great through his mother Atossa, was a man born in the purple. Unlike his predecessors who had fought to create and then to save the empire, Xerxes inherited it at the height of its power. He was the inheritor, a figure driven by the immense weight of his lineage and the need to prove himself a worthy successor to his legendary father. His first task was to crush the rebellion in Egypt, which he did swiftly and ruthlessly. He then turned his full attention to his father's great unfinished project, the conquest of Greece. The failure at Marathon had become a point of dynastic honor, and Xerxes was determined to succeed where his father had been thwarted. He would not just send an army, he would lead the whole of Asia against Europe in a campaign of such breathtaking scale that it would awe the world into submission. For 4 years, the empire mobilized for war. The preparations were monumental, a testament to the Achaemenid state's incredible logistical and engineering capabilities. A massive supply depot was established in Thrace. A canal was dug through the Athos Peninsula, a treacherous cape where a previous Persian fleet had been wrecked, wide enough for 2 warships to pass abreast. This was an astonishing feat of engineering, designed to showcase the king's power to command nature itself. Most famously, when a storm destroyed his first bridge of boats across the Hellespont, the strait separating Asia from Europe, Xerxes, in a symbolic act of rage, ordered the water itself to be whipped 300 times and had fetters thrown into it. He then commanded his engineers to construct an even more impressive double pontoon bridge, a floating highway over which his army could march for 7 days and 7 nights. The army Xerxes assembled was, according to ancient sources like Herodotus, the largest ever seen, numbering in the millions. A figure that is certainly a wild exaggeration, but reflects the sheer awe the force inspired. It was a true imperial army, a stunning mosaic of the nations under his rule, Persians and Medes in their felt caps and scaled armor, Assyrians with their bronze helmets, Scythians with their bows, Indians in cotton, Ethiopians clad in lion skins. It was the empire on the march, a deliberate display of the king's universal power. This was not just an army, it was a moving city, a tidal wave of humanity intended to crush all resistance through its sheer, overwhelming presence. Xerxes was not merely seeking to punish Athens, he was seeking to absorb Greece into his world order, to erase the very idea of a rival civilization. The campaign was conceived as an irresistible act of godlike power, a final solution to the Greek problem that would secure the western frontier of his empire for all time. The Great Armada, the culmination of years of planning and the full expression of imperial might, was finally on the move. The fate of the Western world hung in the balance. The grand army of Xerxes, a torrent of nations flowing from Asia into Europe, seemed unstoppable. The northern Greek states, overwhelmed by its sheer scale, quickly submitted. The remaining free Greek cities, led by Sparta and Athens, formed a desperate alliance and planned their defense. Their strategy was to use geography to their advantage, to find narrow passes and straits where the vast Persian numbers would count for little. The first major clash came at the pass of Thermopylae, a narrow coastal track where a tiny Greek force, led by 300 Spartans under their king Leonidas, planned to hold the Persian army. For 2 days, the Greeks held the pass, their heavy bronze armor and long spears proving devastatingly effective against the lighter-armed Persian infantry in the confined space. From the Persian perspective, this was an infuriating delay, an obstinate refusal by a handful of men to accept the inevitable. Xerxes, watching from his throne, grew increasingly frustrated as his elite troops, including his own royal bodyguards, the Immortals, were repulsed time and again. The stalemate was broken only when a local Greek traitor showed the Persians a hidden mountain path that allowed them to outflank the defenders. Surrounded and overwhelmed, the Spartans and their allies fought to the last man. For the Persians, the Battle of Thermopylae was a tactical victory, the removal of an obstacle on their road south. The path to central Greece was now open. At the same time, the Persian navy engaged the allied Greek fleet in the nearby straits of Artemisium. The battles were indecisive, but with the news of the defeat at Thermopylae, the Greek fleet withdrew. With both land and sea routes now clear, Xerxes marched unopposed into Attica. The city of Athens was evacuated. The Persians entered the deserted city and, in a climactic act of retribution for the burning of Sardis years before, they put it to the torch. The Acropolis, with its temples and shrines, was systematically destroyed. For Xerxes, this was the fulfillment of his vow, the symbolic climax of his campaign. He had avenged his father's honor and had erased the enemy's capital from the map. From his perspective, the war was essentially won. He had defeated his enemies on land and sea, had captured and destroyed their primary city, and had demonstrated the futility of resistance. All that remained was to mop up the remnants of the Greek fleet and accept the final submission of the Peloponnesian states. The great king had seemingly achieved his goal, standing as the undisputed master of Greece amidst the smoking ruins of Athens. Having achieved his primary objective of burning Athens, Xerxes faced a strategic dilemma. The bulk of the Greek army had withdrawn to the Isthmus of Corinth, preparing to defend the Peloponnesian Peninsula, while the remnants of their allied fleet had gathered in the narrow strait between the island of Salamis and the mainland. The Persian commanders were divided. Some advised bottling up the Greek fleet and concentrating on a land assault. Others, confident in their superior numbers and eager for a final, glorious victory, urged an immediate naval attack. Xerxes, buoyed by his successes and perhaps overconfident, chose to fight. The Greek commander, Themistocles, in a brilliant act of deception, sent a false message to Xerxes pretending to be a Persian sympathizer. He claimed the Greek allies were demoralized and planned to flee during the night, urging the great king to attack immediately to trap and destroy them. Xerxes took the bait. he ordered his vast fleet to enter the narrow confines of the Salamis Straits to block any escape. This was a catastrophic tactical error. In the open sea, the sheer number of Persian ships and their speed would have been decisive, but in the cramped, congested waters of the strait, their numbers became a weakness. The heavier Greek triremes with their bronze rams could maneuver more effectively. The Persian fleet became a disorganized mass of ships, running into each other, unable to form a proper battle line. The Battle of Salamis turned into a brutal, chaotic slaughter. The sleek Greek warships rammed and sank the Persian vessels, which were too numerous and too tightly packed to either fight effectively or flee. From a throne set up on the shore, Xerxes watched in horror as his magnificent navy, the pride of his empire, was systematically destroyed. The defeat at Salamis was a devastating and irreversible blow. It shattered Persian naval supremacy in the Aegean and, crucially, threatened Xerxes' own lines of supply and communication back to Asia. His massive army in Greece was now dependent on a vulnerable land route for its sustenance. Fearing being trapped in Europe, Xerxes made the decision to withdraw with the bulk of his army, leaving behind a large, hand-picked force under his top general, Mardonius, to complete the conquest the following year. But the psychological tide had turned. The aura of Persian invincibility was gone. The following spring, in 479 BCE, the final act of the drama played out. At the Battle of Plataea, the largest land battle of the wars, the allied Greek army, led by the Spartans, decisively defeated Mardonius's force. Mardonius himself was killed, and the Persian army was annihilated. The dream of a European satrapy was over. The great invasion had ended in a catastrophic failure, the blunting of Persian expansion and the beginning of a new era of confidence and cultural flourishing for the victorious Greek city-states. The colossal failure of the second invasion of Greece marked a profound turning point for the Achaemenid Empire. It was not the beginning of a sudden collapse. The empire remained immensely powerful, wealthy, and stable for another century and a half. However, the defeat in the West represented the definitive end of its expansionist phase. The dynamic, seemingly limitless energy of the era of Cyrus and Darius was gone, replaced by a more defensive, reactive posture. The long reign of Xerxes after his return from Greece and the reigns of his successors like Artaxerxes I were characterized by a shift in imperial strategy. The focus turned inward to the administration and maintenance of the vast existing domains and to the consolidation of royal power, which was increasingly threatened by intrigue and assassination within the royal court itself. Xerxes himself was eventually murdered in his bed, the victim of a palace conspiracy, setting a grim precedent for the succession struggles that would plague the later Achaemenid dynasty. While direct military conquest in the West was abandoned, Persia's influence remained immense. The empire entered a new phase of soft power, diplomacy. Having failed to conquer the Greeks with arms, the Persian kings now sought to control them with gold. During the long and ruinous Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, Persia played the role of the great arbiter and financier. The king's gold became a decisive factor in Greek politics, funding fleets and armies, propping up one side and then the other, ensuring that the Greek city-states remained divided and weak, incapable of uniting to pose a threat to Persian interests in Anatolia. The King's Peace, a treaty brokered by Artaxerxes II, effectively made the Persian monarch the guarantor of the Greek political order, a stunning reversal achieved through diplomacy where invasion had failed. Yet, this period, often described as a long sunset, was marked by a slow internal decay. The central authority of the great king began to weaken. Powerful satraps in distant provinces like Egypt and Anatolia began to act as semi-independent rulers, sometimes even waging their own wars and raising their own armies. The empire was held together by the inertia of its own vastness and the genius of Darius's original administrative system, but the political will at its center was beginning to fracture. rebellions became more frequent, particularly in Egypt, which managed to break away and maintain its independence for several decades. The empire was becoming a slumbering giant, still possessing immense strength and riches, but lacking the unity and visionary leadership of its founders. It was a world of opulent palaces, labyrinthine court politics, and simmering provincial unrest, a world dangerously vulnerable to a new external shock, a storm that was gathering on its northwestern frontier in the rugged kingdom of Macedon. The final act of the Achaemenid Empire was not a slow decline into obscurity, but a sudden, violent, and spectacular collapse at the hands of a new revolutionary force from the west. The Persian Empire, for all its internal troubles, was still the greatest superpower on earth, a colossal entity of immense wealth and manpower. Its final king, Darius III, was a capable ruler who had restored order after a period of intense court intrigue. But the empire he inherited was about to face an enemy unlike any it had ever encountered. In the kingdom of Macedon, King Philip II had forged a new kind of army, a professional, disciplined force combining heavy infantry in the formidable phalanx formation with powerful heavy cavalry. His son, a young man named Alexander, inherited this military machine and combined it with a strategic genius, a boundless ambition, and a near-mythical charisma. In 334 BC, Alexander the Great crossed the Hellespont into Asia, declaring a pan-Hellenic war of revenge for the Persian invasions of a century and a half earlier. The Achaemenid state, accustomed to dealing with the fractious and predictable Greek city-states, fundamentally misunderstood the nature of this new threat. They underestimated the speed, discipline, and tactical brilliance of the Macedonian army. At the Battle of the Granicus River, Alexander shattered the first Persian army sent against him. He then swept down the coast of Anatolia, liberating the Ionian Greek cities. Darius III, now realizing the gravity of the situation, assembled a massive imperial army and met Alexander at Issus. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Alexander's tactical genius won the day. He led a decisive cavalry charge that broke the Persian line and forced Darius III himself to flee, leaving his family and his royal treasury behind. The pattern was repeated at the final cataclysmic Battle of Gaugamela. On a wide plain deliberately chosen by the Persians to allow them to deploy their full numbers, Alexander, through a series of brilliant maneuvers, once again routed the imperial army and put Darius III to flight. The Persian military was broken, its king a fugitive. Alexander marched unopposed to the great capitals of Babylon and Susa, which surrendered without a fight. He then moved on to the ceremonial heart of the empire, Persepolis. In a deeply symbolic act, he allowed his troops to loot the city and then set fire to the great palace of Xerxes, a final act of revenge for the burning of Athens. Darius III was eventually murdered by one of his own satraps. With his death, the Achaemenid dynasty, which had ruled the world for over 2 centuries, came to an end. The fall was swift, total, and dramatic. But the legacy of the empire Cyrus and Darius had built did not vanish in the flames of Persepolis. It was too vast, too deeply embedded in the fabric of the world. Alexander, far from erasing it, became its final successor. He adopted Persian court dress and customs, encouraged marriages between his soldiers and Persian women, and dreamed of fusing Greek and Persian cultures into a new, single empire. The ghost of Persia did not die, it simply possessed its conqueror. The administrative structures, the road networks, the very idea of a universal, multi-ethnic state, all were inherited by Alexander's Hellenistic successors and, later, by the Romans. The forgotten superpower's DNA was passed on, forming the invisible foundation of the empires that followed, a silent testament to the enduring power of its revolutionary vision.